Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe. Tonight, I'll tell you about a place wrapped in silence and sea mist, a town that knows something it will never speak aloud, and what happens when someone dares to listen too closely. When I first arrived in Pine Reach, I thought the fog was charming. It reminded me of an old oil painting I once saw: gray shoreline, gulls wheeling overhead, water lapping gently at black rocks. That kind of melancholy beauty that makes your thoughts go still for a while. I'd just taken early retirement from a 28-year career in city planning. My heart had started skipping beats, literally, and my doctor suggested somewhere quiet. My wife was gone, years ago now, and with no kids or siblings, there was nothing tethering me to the city. So I packed up, sold the house, and headed north. Pine Reach was barely a dot on the map, tucked into the Oregon coastline like it was trying not to be found. It was perfect. The first thing I noticed driving in was how the fog moved, not drifted, moved. It didn't roll like in the movies, soft and aimless. It came in sudden walls like curtains being drawn. You'd be driving along, sun still peeking through the trees, and then white, dense and soundless, a complete sensory shift. My realtor, a narrow woman named Diane who wore practical hiking boots and always smelled faintly of lemon, gave me a quick orientation when I arrived. The house was an old fisherman's cottage, restored, with a crooked porch and windows that stuck if you didn't yank them just right. "Lovely little town," she said, thumbing through a folder of paperwork. "Quiet, respectful folks. One thing, though." She looked up at me, eyes flat but firm. "When the fog reaches the ground, don't go outside, not even to the porch. Just stay in. It's just a local thing. Tradition." I waited for a wink, a smile, something that said, "Just kidding." It never came. Instead, she patted the folder, handed me the keys, and left. I stood there for a long moment on the porch, watching the gray wall of mist slide along the trees just down the road. It didn't reach the ground that day. Not quite. I fell into a routine quickly. Mornings started with coffee on the porch if it was clear, reading the newspaper the postman kindly dropped off. Afternoons, I'd wander the shoreline trails, take photographs, pick up driftwood. Evenings were for books or tinkering with a model ship I never seemed to finish. The people of Pine Reach were pleasant, if distant. No one asked why I was there or where I'd come from. They offered a nod, a word or two, then went about their business. But they all knew about the fog. Every home had thick blackout curtains. Every door had 3 separate locks. Hardware stores sold heavy-duty weather stripping, like it was a seasonal essential. I even saw one woman pulling her dog inside with such urgency when a fog patch slid across her yard. You'd have thought it was wildfire. I asked an old man in the bakery once, "Why?" He looked over his shoulder, then at me. "You're new," he said flatly. "Best keep your head down, friend." It was 2 weeks in when the fog first touched the ground. I was upstairs reading. The room went dim, fast, like a light had gone out. I looked outside. The trees had vanished. The grass was a blurry smear. Mist crept around the base of the porch steps like spilled milk sliding under a door, and then something else. A pressure. Subtle at first. Not in my ears or chest, but somewhere inside. Like someone had walked into the room behind me and was just standing there, silently. I turned, half expecting to see a figure. Nothing. The pressure didn't go away. It stayed for exactly 23 minutes, long enough for me to watch the clock. Then the fog lifted, and the feeling left with it. The next day, I asked around. Most people brushed me off. but a woman at the general store, white-haired, sharp-eyed, told me something that's haunted me since. "Don't look at them," she whispered, double-bagging my groceries. "They'll look back." When I asked who, she shook her head and wouldn't answer. I didn't sleep well that night. The thing is, I'm not a superstitious man. I believe in weather patterns and atmospheric pressure and weird coastal currents. But even science has its limits. Because the fog came back. And this time, I heard something. It started faint, like wind through tall grass. But it wasn't windy. Then footsteps. Soft, padded, like someone walking barefoot on wet wood. They circled the house, once, twice. I peered through the window. Nothing. But the pressure returned stronger now, like static behind my eyes. Then the back door creaked. I hadn't locked it. I stood at the top of the stairs holding my breath, listening to the click of the latch moving. My feet refused to move. I kept telling myself it was the wind, the moisture, wood expanding. But the door clicked again, louder, like it was opening. Still no sound of footsteps. Just silence, dense, unnatural silence. I backed into the bedroom, locked the door, sat on the bed with the model ship in my hands. Something to do, something real. After what felt like hours, the pressure eased. The next morning, the door was shut tight. Nothing broken, no sign of entry, but the floor just inside was wet, perfect bare footprints, leading halfway to the kitchen and stopping. I cleaned the footprints with trembling hands. The floorboards creaked as I moved, like the house remembered something I didn't. That afternoon, I drove down to the sheriff's office. There was only one deputy on duty, a younger guy named Trent with sunburned cheeks and a sleepy demeanor. I told him what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. He didn't write anything down, just nodded slowly and offered a tight-lipped smile. "You locked the door after that?" he asked. "I did." "Then you're fine," he said, standing to signal the end of the conversation. "Just don't open it when the fog comes and keep your curtains shut." There was that tone again. Like everyone in this town had rehearsed the same tired lines, a kind of unspoken pact. As I was walking out, he added without looking at me, "They're not interested in people who mind their own business." After that, I started watching the fog, timing it, recording how long it stayed. I kept a notebook on my desk and filled it with dates, times, temperature, wind direction, anything I could find. Maybe it was my way of regaining control. Maybe it was obsession. But something had changed. I started seeing silhouettes. At first, it was brief. Just a shape at the edge of the mist, barely visible, still and tall. One night, it stood in my front yard for nearly an hour, never moved. I turned every light off and watched through a crack in the curtain, heart hammering. Then there were more of them. 2, 3, sometimes 4, never close, never touching the house, just watching. I asked Diane, the realtor, if anyone had ever reported break-ins or strange activity during fog nights. She sipped her tea like it was boiling and said, "Some things live better in silence, Mr. Heron." "I don't believe in monsters," I replied. She met my gaze for the first time. Neither did I, until Pine Reach. One night, around 2:30 a.m., the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen. It covered the windows like frost. I couldn't see my hand 6 inches past the glass. The house groaned like it was under pressure, and then a knock. Just one, clean and clear. From the back door, then another, front door, then the windows. It wasn't frantic, it was rhythmic, like they were making sure I knew they were there. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my flashlight. It rolled across the floor and stopped at the base of the stairs. I picked it up and backed into the bedroom, locked the door, and slid the dresser in front of it for good measure. Outside, the knock stopped. Then the whispering began. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Not loud, but layered, like multiple voices whispering just below hearing level, speaking in unison but out of sync. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel them, crawling under my skin like tiny insects. I put my hands over my ears. That didn't help. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it all vanished. Light returned to the window, the fog lifted, but something had changed. I no longer felt alone in the house, even during the day. Doors clicked shut when I wasn't near them. Cold spots lingered in corners. The shadows in the hallway seemed thicker than they should be. And I began dreaming. Always the same. I'm walking through the fog, barefoot. I can't see, but I know I'm not alone. There are shapes around me, just out of reach, whispering. I'm looking for something, or someone. I call out, but I have no voice. Eventually, I find a house. My house. But it's wrong. Bigger inside, stretched and warped. I walk through the halls until I find a door made of black wood. It's locked. And I always wake up just before I open it. One morning, I woke to find the notebook gone. The one with all the fog notes. I searched everywhere. Nothing. Later that day, I found it lying on the grass by the tree line, open, pages torn, words smeared like someone had dipped their fingers in the ink. That was the same day the phone started ringing. I didn't even have a landline. The calls came at night. Always the same time, 1:44 a.m., just one ring. Then silence. No number. Just unknown. I stopped answering. But the whispers started coming through the phone. Not when it rang, just randomly, when I'd be sitting on the couch or lying in bed. A faint electronic hum followed by static. And then that layered whispering again, like 100 mouths just behind a veil. The pressure returned. Stronger, more persistent. Something was closing in. I decided I had to leave. I packed that night, threw everything I could into the car, left the rest. I didn't care. I'd drive until I hit sunlight and cell service and people who looked you in the eye when they spoke. But when I got in the car, the fog was already back, thick as milk. My headlights barely cut 2 feet ahead. I could see the trees twitching, the road disappearing into white. I drove anyway, and after 20 minutes, I was back at my driveway. I hadn't turned, I hadn't looped. The road had folded. I sat in the car for a long time, engine running, hands clenched on the wheel. The fog pressed in from all sides, thick and steady, as if the world beyond had simply ceased to exist. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I tried again, turned the car around, took a different path, one I hadn't driven before, a back road that looked barely used, covered in pine needles and stray gravel, the kind of road that should eventually connect to something. After 10 minutes of slow crawling, my porch lights appeared ahead of me. Same trees, same rusted mailbox, same crooked mailbox flag I never fixed. I killed the engine, sat there staring. And then I saw them. Figures. 5, maybe 6. Standing at the edge of the fog just beyond my front yard, perfectly still. Tall and thin, like telephone poles. No faces I could see. No movement. Except their heads turned when I stepped out of the car. Not fast, not robotic. Slow, measured. Like they were finally acknowledging me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go back inside. I sat in the car with the doors locked and the windows fogging up, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to sanity. The figures didn't move. They just watched. By dawn, they were gone, and the road finally worked again. But I didn't leave, not then, because I had one question that needed answering. Why here? Why Pine Reach? Why this fog? I started asking again. I stopped people in town, pushed harder. Most just avoided me. A few told me to pray. One woman cried when I asked about the fog and refused to speak. But someone, an old lighthouse keeper named Marlin, finally broke. He invited me to his shack on the cliffs, a place with yellowed maps, tangled ropes, and the smell of brine soaked into the floorboards. "You want to know the truth?" he asked, voice low and rough. "I need to," I said. He poured 2 mugs of strong black coffee and stared out the cracked window for a long while before speaking. "They're not ghosts, not demons either. They're echoes." "Echoes of what?" "Us," he said simply, "or something close to it. The fog, it's like a skin, thin. Something watches through it. And when it likes what it sees, it tries to remember, tries to copy." I swallowed hard. "And when it remembers too well?" Marlin turned, eyes hollow. "Then it doesn't need you anymore." That night, I dreamed again. Same fog. Same door of black wood. Only this time, it was open. Inside, a copy of me stood, facing away, silent. Its hands twitched, and when it turned, its face was almost mine. But the eyes were all wrong. I woke up gasping, cold sweat, bare feet on the hardwood, heart punching my ribs like it wanted out. I went to the mirror, looked, and for one small second, just a blink. My reflection didn't move when I did. That was 3 days ago. I don't go outside anymore. The fog doesn't just visit now, it lingers. Hours, sometimes full days. I see the shapes more often. They stand closer now, at the edge of the windows, at the porch, at the glass of the back door, watching, waiting. The whispering has changed, too. Louder, almost words. I think they're saying my name. Sometimes I hear footsteps in the attic, or the crawl space, or behind the closet wall. But when I check, there's only the fog. I don't know how much longer I have. The pressure is constant now, like the house is underwater, like I'm breathing in someone else's thoughts. They're remembering me. Every detail, every habit, every fear, and when they've remembered enough, they'll come inside, not with force, not with screams, just a knock. And if I open the door, if I so much as look at them, I think I'll see myself smiling back. And I won't be the one standing there anymore.